All right, welcome to part 3 of Weeding Out Your Classroom Library. I talked about 3 different categories of books that we want to take out. The first is books that perpetuate stereotypes. Second is books that emphasize a difference so much that it becomes a negative thing. And the third is books that are watering down stories so much that they take away from the seriousness of a problem, or they water down a whole social movement to one exceptional person, or they just make people invisible. So in this video, I want to talk about this second group. These are the books that emphasize difference so much that we're making it an abnormal thing, an inconvenience, something that we don't want to include. Now, one aspect about this is about balance in your class library. Does your class library show a wide variety of life experiences? And does it show diversity within each group of people? I think about this because in the race to have more diverse books, there have been waves of books about characters with marginalized identities, where the whole story centered around their struggle against that marginalized identity. So books about Black people are about racism and slavery. Books about Indigenous people are focused on some kind of Indigenous tradition or some kind of ceremony. Books about Asian characters are about immigrants who struggle with language or names that people can't pronounce. Disabled characters have to overcome something their disability stops them from doing. Queer characters have to prove themselves in order to be accepted or fight to stop people bullying them. Books that feature diverse characters shouldn't always be focused on that character's race, disability, gender, whatever it is. We also need to be able to show diverse characters living normal lives, living in heterogeneous communities, doing things that our kids can relate to. And that's not to say that we shouldn't have these other books too, because we need to see the struggles that people are still facing in today's society. But we need to make sure we have that balance, that we're showing that this is part of a life that is still relatable for all of our children. What I want you to look at when considering what might come out of your class library is individual books that have so much focus on the difference that it becomes a sort of carnival act. Look at how different that person is. Oh, they can't even live a normal life. An example that comes to my mind is a book called Ian's Walk, a story about autism. The book begins with a note to the reader, a note about siblings of autistic children, in which they refer multiple times to the healthy sibling in contrast to the autistic child. Within the story itself, the focus is clearly on emphasizing how different Ian is and what a burden he is to his siblings. When we first meet Ian, the sister speaks to him and she says he doesn't answer because he has autism. If you didn't know otherwise, this might lead you to believe that being nonverbal is a central characteristic of autism. The first half of the book basically all has a new setting on each spread. It uses each spread just to show how different Ian is. Ian hears things differently. Ian sees things differently. And at first, this might seem like a positive way to frame it, but it quickly shifts onto an emphasis on how weird his behaviors are. I yank him away before anyone notices, or Ian won't even look at the pizza, hot dogs, or soft pretzels. At the climax of the book, where I imagine the author is trying to write a happy resolution, the sister instead hugs Ian, even though she says she knows he doesn't like it. The other sister comes in and she also hugs them, although I would assume she also knows Ian doesn't like hugs. The book kind of makes it sound like it's okay to treat Ian as less than, and it's okay to disrespect his boundaries because they're not like the girls' boundaries. They're not what we would maybe consider typical boundaries. The message that seems to come across in this book is that Ian is very different. The narrator says Ian's brain doesn't work like other people's. And while that's factually accurate, it's portrayed as always being a negative thing. It's a nuisance. It's an embarrassment. Although his sisters learn to be more patient with his behaviors at the end of the book, the focus is definitely on his deficits. There isn't a single mention of the assets that he might have. Take a look at some of the books in your library that focus on a disability, a neurodivergence, or a language learner. Do they focus on a deficit and how it inconveniences or embarrasses people? Do the people in question need to be rescued by someone more able? Do they need to assimilate or change or hide who they are in order to be successful? If we're using these books for our children's learning, what exactly are they learning? As windows, are children seeing all the wonderful things that people bring into our lives? As mirrors, are children seeing that they all have something to offer? Who does the book teach us to value? And who does it teach us is less than? As you're reading these books, try to look from the perspective of someone who doesn't have any other context, because many of our students won't. Make sure that the messages they get from your books are that we all have assets, we all have value, we all deserve to be heard and respected.